We are born free.
And we will die free.
The time in between, though,
That's complicated.
in that time, governments, institutions, and our egos will limit our ability to find true freedom in this life. These are real stories of real people overcoming the odds, persevering in justice, and unlocking their potential. Welcome to Finding Freedom. Here's your host, John Odermatt.
Hey everybody, welcome in for another episode of Finding Freedom, right here on either the Lions of Liberty Network or on the Finding Freedom podcast. That's right, it's on one of two podcast feeds. Which one you're listening on? Doesn't matter to me. I'm just glad you're listening. You can subscribe to either wherever podcasts are found. Typically with the Finding Freedom podcast feed, which you can find by just searching Finding Freedom, John Odermatt. It'll pop up on any feed. Typically, you get the Tuesday Rewind show. However, this past week, there was no Rewind show because I was on vacation and was in Disney World with the family and wasn't about to take the time to dig through the archives to give you a wonderful Rewind show when I was trying to have fun and relax with the family. But next week, surely, I will bring you that Rewind show. In the meantime, if you missed it, the most popular exclusive Finding Freedom show that I've done on the Finding Freedom feed in that Tuesday time slot was the solo rant that I did about the LPPA convention, recapping it, talking about all the goings on and what happened there and the craziness and the fights and all the different things. There weren't really fights. There weren't fights. It wasn't bad. It was all's well that ends well. And I think for the most part, things went pretty well at the LPPA. So turning the page to today's episode. Today I have a great guest, and it's always good. It's always fun to be able to come back and bring a guest on again and add to the story, but you don't just add to the story, you add a winning element. You add a bit of justice, maybe, to the story. So I'm really excited for Lauren Reynolds to come back on the show and share really what happened with her story. The last time we talked to her, which was almost 2 years ago, I think she was this lawsuit was just gathering steam against the BOP down at the Coleman facility in Florida. And now, well, I'll let the show tell you what happened, but she's getting paid, and that's always good. So without any more chit-chat, let's get to the interview. All right, my guest today on Finding Freedom is Lauren Reynolds. This is actually Lauren's second time back on the show, and she is here to provide an update on a lawsuit that Lauren and I believe 14 other women had filed against the Coleman Federal Correction Complex. And the good news is that the lawsuit was settled, and they received settlements. I'll let Lauren go into detail if she wants to for how much they did. But there's also, bad news as well. The BOP officers were not prosecuted, and we can get into that. But wanted to bring Lauren back on to really share the details of what happened, and also go back and, since I'm sure many listeners didn't hear the original interview, to talk about actually the abuse that happened at Coleman and get into that. So Lauren, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me back.
Well, good to have you here. And I think probably the best place to start. Actually, you know what? I changed my mind. I was going to say we'll start and do a recap of sort of that first episode and the story itself. But before we do that, I'm just curious. You've been through this whole ordeal. I'm sure going through the legal process and the lawsuit and the settlement. I'm sure that sort of brought back a lot of trauma, a lot of things that you don't like to relive, but also, this is sort of behind you now. Maybe there's a little bit of closure. So I'm just curious to know, but how you feel right now. Do you feel like you've gotten some closure from this?
I definitely feel like I've gotten closure. Do I feel like it's to the degree to move forward and forget about it? Definitely not. I'll go more into it as I go through the legal process, but I was still going to intensive counseling while we were going through the mediation process because, of course, I was having to repeat myself over and over and over again. They would ask me the same question 30 different ways to try to
Hmm.
catch me in a lie, even though the officer admitted to abusing me. They were still trying to figure a way to get around it, per se. So, probably I would say about a month ago, I have stopped going to counseling. I've been able to cope with it and move forward with my life. Only time I really ever think about it, obviously, is when I do public speaking or I'm able to talk about it with people. So um, I don't get as emotional anymore. I feel like part of the therapy in it is talking about it. So coming on podcasts and things like that always help as well.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. I mean, we were just talking in the pre-show chat that I think the first time we talked originally was, I guess, almost 2 years ago. And I remember at that time, that was right, I think right when the lawsuit was filed. And, for really all this time to pass. And now finally, after all this time to have some closure, um, that's a lot to go through. So, for the
Yeah.
benefit of myself and my audience, um, if you could take us through really what happened. So, these yourself and 14 other women brought this lawsuit against Coleman Federal Correction Complex in Florida. So, I mean, you don't have to go into every single detail and every single instance, but what happened at Coleman?
Well, me personally, I had gotten to Coleman in the beginning of 2019 to finish out 10 months of my sentence. And 3 weeks after I got to Coleman, the officer that I was working for started making sexual passes at me, making comments about my body, my looks. And it escalated from there where he could get me into areas where nobody was around and there were no cameras. And he started touching me and he would make me perform oral sex on him. And this went on for about 5 months. And at Coleman, it's a everybody does it, but nobody tells type of thing. And so this was happening to a lot of different women by a lot of different officers. Some officers were abusing multiple women. And so I would say September of 2019, we came together, we got an attorney, and we went and reported to the investigator for the compound that we were being sexually abused. And we filed a notice to sue to the BOP in November of 2019.
Can I jump in real quick? 'Cause I
Uh-huh.
think
Yeah, yeah.
if I remember correctly, so you were out at that time, but there were some of the women were still at Coleman when this lawsuit was being filed, right?
Yes, the majority of us were currently at Coleman when we filed the notice to sue. A couple
Okay.
of the girls got out right after that, and the first time I spoke to you, I was actually on an ankle monitor at the halfway house.
Okay.
And so I remember we talked that I was a little nervous that they would send me back if they knew I was
Hmm.
talking to you, but
Yeah.
obviously they didn't. But once we filed the notice to sue, a lot of the girls started getting out. There are a few that had longer sentences, but with COVID, they actually got released under Trump's plan where you finish your sentence at home. So there's a few of the
Mhm.
girls that are technically still incarcerated, but they are doing their time at their house. So nobody is physically in Coleman as of now. What? Go ahead.
Yeah, I got you. I got you off track there, but
Yeah.
yeah. So you were talking about that time in September 2019, late 2019, when this was all starting. So how I'm curious when these 15 women came together. how did that come about? Was it, I mean, was it kind of hard to, I mean, to get to, find people that were willing to come forward with you, or was it just sort of something where like it just bubbled up and it's like enough is enough, we got to do something?
I believe it was more of a bubbling up. At first, there was a core of like two or three of us, and then I wouldn't say it was campaigning, but it was just like, look, I know this is happening to you. We're gonna do this. You know, are you going? Do you want to join as well? And then, of course, everybody was scared of what was going to happen to us. Anything you say against an officer, they take you to the county jail. But obviously, the more of us, they can't send everybody to the county jail.
Hmm.
So once we started talking to the investigator, officers were getting walked off the property one by one. And so then it became more of a scarlet letter that we had. A lot of the officers and inmates were happy that we did it because it had been going on for so long. And of course, others were pissed off about it because they weren't getting whatever contraband or things like that they were getting from those specific officers. So they were being preyed on. They just did not realize the manipulation that they were under.
Yeah, that's a crazy thing. I want to read you the article you sent me. There was
Mm-hmm.
there's a quote from Joe Roas, the Southeast Regional Vice President for the Workers Union,
Yeah, he's a
Council of
joke.
Prisons. He said, so yeah, he said it's a sediment of other correctional officers. Shit, what did he say? Oh, he said it was a black eye on an otherwise hardworking and upright staff, and it's a sediment that other correctional officers share. He said, I'm just sad because honestly, those officers got away with the crime, which maybe he's being honest there. But basically, he's saying, as they say a lot of times in circumstances like this, just a few bad apples. Well, what's your response to that?
He's a creep. He was head of the union during the time this was going on. So he had a personal interest in it. He is one of the officials that did get a promotion after all of this. Um, Also in USA Today, the outgoing warden got a like $30,000 bonus, as well as the complex manager got a bonus out the door as well. So all of them had a hand in it because they didn't do anything about it, yet they retired with bonuses, and in Mr. Rojas's case, got a promotion.
And the thought there is that they were essentially they were bought off to not say anything.
Yeah,
Which that's it's not surprising.
not at all. It's the government.
So you talked about trying to find your quote here, that you said it wasn't about the money that you received, but you had hoped that the trial would help spark prison reform. Reform so this wouldn't happen again. Do you feel like that part of it really didn't, come to fruition in the way that you hoped?
No, it definitely has not. I've been in touch with FAM again. Like we spoke before, I was supposed to go to the White House and speak in front of committees. I know that there's a few things in the works now that COVID is settled down. So I expect to be going back to the White House and speak in front of committees again and share my story. During mediation, the biggest thing that hit me was it wasn't the trial judge that did mediation, it was one of his coworkers. And when I was speaking to the judge about, what I wanted to come out of this, and when we were in mediation, it was the first time that I'd ever seen in black and white that he admitted to abusing me.
Hmm.
And so when we were going through mediation, that was validating, even though I know what he did was wrong and he knew it, for him to actually admit it was probably the most validating thing out of the whole situation. Because mentally I knew it was wrong, And everybody else around me was saying, oh, well, she's, of age to consent. And they were trying to pull all these different things to try and get around it. But as far as going to trial and things like that, the main reason that we did not go to trial is because the original attorney in the case, Brian Bush, I think he saw us as a get rich quick scheme and didn't do his homework, and he was way above his head. So he actually blew a deadline to where we could not sue the officers individually. So it would turn into a civil case for them to be prosecuted because Bill Barr declined to file federal or criminal charges against them.
When you were on the show the first time, was your attorney on with you? I'm trying to remember.
That was my attorney that I took to mediation with me. That was my second attorney.
Oh, okay.
James. Yeah, James was with us.
Okay, that's right. So just to get into the prison reform aspect of it, I'm sure you have some ideas on this. Mm-hmm. What steps do you think could be taken? What sort of protocols put in place in order to protect women so this doesn't continue to happen?
My main thing would be a body camera, just like regular police officers, how they have been adding body cameras, because officers are never accountable to have more than one inmate. BOP policy states that there can't be one inmate to one officer, but obviously that rule is not followed or we wouldn't be in this situation. So I believe body cams are a big thing. Actually punishing them as far as suspending without pay. They get suspended with pay when they're under investigation, or they just get moved to a different department, as well as putting cameras everywhere. Coleman is the biggest complex and seems to have the least amount of cameras. There is PREA training yearly for the BOP. Obviously, that doesn't work either. So my main thing would be body cameras, because they wouldn't be able to slide into all these nooks and crannies. And then basically someone just sitting there watching those cameras, and if you lose somebody, then you radio them.
That makes sense. My main thing with cameras, be it cameras in this situation or cameras with police officers, though, is who owns the footage and where does all the footage go? And I mean, I think you want to put it in some sort of protection where the footage is destroyed, so it's not, somebody can hack in and steal this footage, or who knows what kind of controls that they would have around that. So I think it's a good thing. I understand where you're coming from, and I mostly agree with it, I think. But it's, because it opens up another liability of what is on those cameras then. But no, that's good. So another thing, though, is when they are investigated, who is investigating them? Aren't they basically investigating themselves?
Yes. Where the Coleman officers went wrong is the investigator was actually ready to prosecute. DeCamillo was the officer for the investigative services, and when all of this blew up and he fought for us tooth and nail, we never went to the county jail. He protected us to the best of his ability. Once this was settled, he was demoted to a regular officer again, and so he actually retired because of the demotion.
Who is this? The one who did the investigating?
Yes, the one who did the investigating before it was actually turned over to the OIA, to internal affairs, and to those people. So obviously the higher
he had
people.
tried to cover it up, or?
No, he was trying to get everybody prosecuted.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And they demoted him. They demoted him because of that?
Yes.
Wow. Unbelievable.
Yes.
So I'm curious, what sort of response you're getting from, I don't know, what sort of media attention this has gotten, or people reaching out for articles, things of that nature?
When I was still actually incarcerated. I reached out to the Miami Herald. I have a friend that knows a few media people, and so Romy has done a couple stories. I've spoke directly to her, and then she went to the Tampa Bay Times. So that ending story was in the Tampa Bay Times. But when this was going on and I was still incarcerated, my family actually reached out to Marco Rubio's office and never got a response. So when I got out, I personally called Marco Rubio's office because in one of the first stories, he wanted to throw his hat in the ring and say, there needed to be change and he was going to investigate it. And so I tried to kick dust up with his office. And I spoke to Taylor, one of his reps, and they were basically saying, when did your parents call? When did they leave a message? And so, I gave him dates and all that. And he basically put his tail between his legs and couldn't give me any straight answer. And so I've said on every podcast and media thing that I want to talk to him. I told Taylor, I want to personally speak to him because if you're, going to go on a public platform and say you're going to do something, I'm the one to talk to. I'm your reference. Let's do something.
Doesn't surprise me. Rubio's a weasel.
No. Yeah, he is. And so, I also told Taylor that every podcast, everything I go on, I'm going to drag him and say that he has still failed to call me back 2 years later. And I actually put another request in on his website a week ago and have not heard anything back. So
that's a shame. It's our elected officials. All they care about is padding their own pockets with money.
Right.
So we talked about before the show that you didn't have to sign a non-disclosure agreement. Was that something that they tried to force upon you and you really had to resist?
They didn't force it. When we were going back and forth in mediation, of course, the first offer they offered me was like $50,000. And basically, they like to play the game. And so I told them, okay, well, I'll sign a non-disclosure for $2 million. And they were like, no. So it kind of came up that way. Obviously in our agreement, we can't sue any other government entity and things like that. But they danced with the non-disclosure, but it wasn't that, it wasn't forced.
So how contentious were the negotiations? Did you come to a resolution pretty quickly in that, or?
The mediator actually tried to schedule us as much as possible. So the first one was at the end of October, and she was trying to get us, obviously to settle before the holidays and all of that. So we met twice in the end of October and then twice in the middle of November. And I actually settled a couple days before Thanksgiving of 2020. During the mediations, the judge, when we were going back and forth on numbers, and I believe at that point the number was 1.2 million. And the judge looked right at me because we were on Zoom. She looked right at me and she said, "You're never going to get that for something like this." And what really struck me about that is, there's a going rate for this. Like it's so common. There's a price point and there's a bracket on somebody's worth.
And that was a female judge saying that?
It was a female judge that said that to me. And I just looked at her and I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. And I was like, something like this, like, so it's socially accepted, things like this.
Yeah, that's messed up. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. So that's one thing that's stuck with me 2 years later.
Yeah, I'm sure that'll probably always stick with you. That's really just not acceptable behavior from a judge to say something like that. That's craziness.
Right.
So at this point, you kind of have that chapter of your life, I guess, as much behind you as you can. what are your plans going forward? What would you like to see yourself accomplish in the next 5 years or so?
In the next 5 years, I hopefully will be going to the White House regularly, being a part of criminal justice reform and prison oversight. I think oversight, period, is non existent. There is an actual position for a PREA compliance officer. I am available and ready to travel if they need somebody.
And what would that
Also,
position entail?
they actually go prison to prison and do oversight on PREA complaints, basically what we did, and make sure that everything is in compliance and they're actually following investigations. Because, like we talked before, once a inmate files an investigation, they send them to the county jail, then they ship them across the country so no investigation can be done because the
Mm-hmm.
inmate's not there to testify. So I think that's the biggest part to keep the prisons in compliance, is having an eye on them and making sure that they don't ship the inmate. Therefore, there can be an investigation.
Yeah, I
I'm
guess
also
I guess it would be key in that position that that person would have to have the power to, if they do ship one out, say, "Oh no, you're not doing that," and ship them back. Because
right,
otherwise, you're kind of in the same position, right?
right, and I feel like also they need to bring in like a third party, because when all these people work together, it's like the boys club. You don't tell on each other.
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely think it needs to be an outsider or a third party. I'm also finishing up my book on my story. And then also there is a few mini series and things like that that I'm talking to a few people about. But of course, when COVID happened, that's kind of shook everything up and pushed everything back.
So like a Netflix type miniseries or what?
Yes, it's going to be more like a docu-series.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's being shopped right now with a few different platforms.
Oh wow, well, that's a lot going on. So do you have a target for when you want to have your book out?
I am with a publisher right now. I would probably say within the next 6 months. Of course, I will let you read it first before we
Awesome.
talk about it.
So what else? What else from this case? I mean, because you obviously know this much better than I do. What haven't I asked you about that is a very important component that people need to know about?
I feel like if you're a friend or a family member of an inmate that this is happening to, it takes a lot of outside help and outside work to actually get the lawsuit part of it rolling. Like we spoke about before, they listen to everything as far as phone calls, letters, things like that. Like I mentioned about Brian Bush, the first attorney, it was a get rich quick scheme. I believe from our podcast, a couple of people actually reached out to Jimmy after the stories were published and you talked to him to
Hmm.
actually hire him for similar instances.
I should get a commission from Jimmy. Come on.
You need to talk to him about that. I don't even get a commission from him. But no, there has been a few people, as well as on our case, that just wanted to give supporting information and evidence to try and get them prosecuted as well. But the biggest thing is, you have to do your research and find an attorney that can actually handle this type of case. Obviously, there's not BOP rape attorneys, but you definitely have to find somebody that's going to fight for you and go to bat for you against the government, because a lot of people don't want to go against the government.
Yeah, and there's not a lot of attorneys who have had success doing it in a
Right.
case like this. I wouldn't think. So yeah,
No.
there's not a lot with a track record who they can come to you and say, oh yes, we've done this and this. Well, now Jimmy can to a certain extent, I guess. But
Oh, yeah.
so anything else? Is there any other message that you want to get out there? Anything that you want to plug or talk about?
Just my main thing is, like I said, if you know somebody going through this or somebody that's being physically, mentally, sexually abused behind bars, you need to speak up. It's going to be grueling. Um, you're going to go through a lot of pain and heartache, but in the end, you have to stand up and stick together because it's going to keep happening to the next person. And the next person might be your mom, your sister, your brother, your dad, because we're all one step away from being put in prison, one bad decision.
So that kind of made me think of something. So you talked about family, the importance of family supporting, and
Hmm.
if they're able to financially, in
Hmm.
order to back their loved one who is in prison. But I mean, I can see why the BOP moves people around because they move them out of that situation. They're isolated. Maybe they were close to family before where they could visit. Now they're on the other
Hmm.
side of the country. They can't even see them. And it's probably very easy just to, once you are out of that situation, you start talking to yourself like, what happened? I mean, not convincing yourself it didn't happen, but you probably start to convince yourself that, oh, it's probably just easier if I just make myself forget about this than push back and try to get justice.
I do agree with that, but that's when, the anger has to override the fear. I told my parents about it when they came to visit me. We were literally sitting in the BOP visiting room, and I had to tell them what happened so they could call the lawyers, so they could do stuff for me. I know everybody does not have that, but Amanda, one of the girls on the case, the people that didn't have that, her mom kind of turned into the group mom
Mm-hmm.
and would make sure everybody's stuff was done. But no, I definitely see where the fear can set in. And the BOP gets away with it because there's a statute of limitations.
And we didn't talk about it at the top of the show, but it's probably important just to note for context. What were you in prison for? What was your conviction?
Felon in possession of a firearm, aiding and abetting, and a probation violation.
So all nonviolent crimes, right?
Correct.
I mean,
Correct.
yeah. So you're in prison in the first place. Shouldn't be in prison. And how many years did you end up serving?
They gave me 12 years. I served 10 and a half years on a 5 year mandatory minimum.
How does that work? 10 and a half on a 5-year mandatory minimum.
Yeah, they sentenced me 12 years.
Okay. Ridiculous.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, I talk about this all the time, but the prison system, of course, itself is a huge problem. I mean, the way it's structured, it's a broken system, but a component of that problem is the public who looks at the prison system and says, "Oh, you screwed up, you made a mistake, you broke this law, you deserve to be in prison in this horrible environment because that horrible environment, yeah, maybe where you'll be assaulted and violent things will happen because you made that mistake, you deserve that." That is just despicable for people to think that in some way there's anything good going to come from that. And that's sort of like, I don't know what percentage of society, but there's a lot of people who think about prison that way. Like, well, you're in prison. What do you expect? What would you say to someone like that?
Um, I, it's a terrible comparison, but I compare the prison system to, you know, nobody cares about school shootings until their kid is the one that gets shot. Same thing with the prison system. Nobody cares about reform. Nobody cares about people in prison until their family member or their friend is the
True.
one in prison.
That's the truth. I mean, that's what pulled me into caring about this, having a family member going to
Mhm.
prison. So that's, I mean, I think there's more. I mean, with shows like this, and I mean, there's lots of great content out there. People who have been to prison making content, writing books, like you're writing a book, and this docu-series also that I'm sure will come out. I think it's a lot better today with people being educated and understanding, how bad the issue is. It needs to be corrected, but it's not anywhere close to where it needs to be to actually, I think, get to the point that we can totally transform the prison system.
No, I completely agree. A lot of people ask me, you were gone for so long, it was all of your 20s, how long do you really think it took you to realize, the gravity of the situation, and, oh, I need to change, and, all of those thoughts of the gravity of it. And
Mm-hmm.
I say it, to truly have the clarity, it took about 2.5 years. And that was totally maturing, bettering myself, mentally, physically, emotionally. So it's like lost time for everybody. 2.5 years and actually being there 10.5 years. It's a big difference.
Yeah. So 2.5 years, you feel personally that you were at a point where you could have left, gone back into society and added value to society, been with your family, which would have helped them, and there would have been less suffering all around, from your family and friends as well. People always forget about that they go through a lot of this as well. But instead, you have to sit in there for 8 more years, and everybody suffers. And I'm sure it's different. And of course, depending on the crime, you're talking about violent crimes and things like that. That's sort of its own category. But nonviolent crimes, many nonviolent crimes, there should not be any prison sentence in my opinion. But I think that's a great way to illustrate really the lost time. And it's not just lost time for the prisoner, it's lost time for everybody
The family.
involved in it.
Right. And just on the back half of it, they gave me 3 years probation. I've been on probation for a little over a year and a half. Federal probation, you only have to do 50% of your time. My halfway mark was December 2nd. I had spoke to the probation officer about terminating my probation early, and they refused to file for me to get off of probation early because they said the nature of my charges. But the current probation officer that I have had for almost a year, I've never met her in person. I've never had a drug test. I fill out a paper once a month on the internet, to report per se.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically like a questionnaire. And she pretty much told me, look, you're a waste of my time. I'm a waste of your time. Just call me if you need anything. And so that's literally how I do my probation. And they get about $45,000 a year from me.
That is so ridiculous. And people would respond to that and say, "Well, that's good in your probation officer. They understand that they're not giving you a hard time for no reason." And yes, I would agree that that's a good thing. But at the same time, you don't need to be on probation, and this probation officer is being paid for something that doesn't need to be done. So, how's that good?
Right. It's not benefiting either one of us. And I feel like, get rid of me, give somebody else a chance that's been in prison 10, 15, 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
Let them come out on supervised release. Let them get acclimated, because it does take a few months to get completely comfortable. When I went in, iPhone just came out, just the simple things. Going to a hotel and the new keyless entry where you hold it up in front of the, when you haven't seen that.
In fairness, I'm still figuring that keyless entry. I'm still figuring that out, so don't feel bad there.
But yeah, there's just little things where I'm just like, oh my God, I don't know how to do this. Getting in an elevator in a hotel, I didn't know you had to hold your key up to the thing to make the elevator go. And you stand there like a dummy. everyone's looking at you like you're crazy.
You should look back at them and just say, "I just got out of prison. Back off."
No, I just
See the
laugh
look on
and
their
go,
face.
oh. Oh, that's a good way to scare them, John. That's a good way to scare
I
them.
know. All right, Lauren. Well, thank you for coming on the show. When we talked last time, there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of stress around this. I'm sure there's probably still a good amount of that, but at least the chapter of the lawsuit is behind you. You've got your settlement. Hopefully, you can relax a little bit, enjoy it, and like you talked about, start working towards doing what you can to change the system from your perspective. So I wish you luck with that.
Thanks, John. Thanks for having me back on again.